Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 141, The Tree of Life, Physical Regenesis. Now this is a very interesting early 1900s text, early 20th century. Link in the description, as always, to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links are to my books, blogs, and this is sort of a combination work of a bit of quack pseudoscience, a bit of faith healing, a little prophecy. It's just a generally strange text, a little bit homeopathic at times, and covers some slightly primitive, outdated biochemistry as well. If you're into that sort of work, on my books, blogs, there's a whole section related to herbals and other works of this kind. That's where this one, of course, is categorized as well. Now, this is a 52-page work, so it's not tiny, but it's fairly short. It's a booklet-length manuscript. And in it, George Washington Carey, proposes that the 12 signs of the zodiac, one of his major proposals is that they overlap with 12 inorganic chemical compounds that are found within the human cell. Propounds how that's spiritually significant from a generally Christian background. Also proposes that the post-revelation end time and New Jerusalem of Christianity has nothing to do with maybe a more orthodox biblical view of those things, and has to do simply with a world in which work has been more or less abolished due to automation. Technology and spiritual development have healed all diseases. He goes into a lot of scriptural dogma to prove his point. Some of it is technically accurate. For instance, and he points this out, Jesus Christ said, well, one of the hallmarks of a Christian is they'll lay hands on people, they'll be healed. They can heal all sickness. They can do all of these miraculous, otherworldly things. Now, one could say, therefore, there are no true Christians because we never observe that. But Washington Carey, of course, thought that was very much true. One of the theories in vogue at the time, for instance, was that a lot of sickness was simply caused due to overeating. Now, in the 1910s, most of the population was not overeating. You were just barely getting to the world as it is now in the sense of people having generally ready access to most basic foodstuffs. There was still a lot of starvation even in industrialized countries, especially among urban populations, actually. It was better to be a farmer in an economic downturn back then than to be in a town or a city. Vermont knew that full well. We were almost unaffected by the Depression because we already had the dirt floor cabins and no electricity in most parts of Vermont during the Great Depression. Actually, my grandpa has spoken about this. But this is a faith-healing manuscript as well, essentially propounding that a person becomes immortal through sinlessness, or at the very least less subject to corruption. That is disease that is caused by the corruption of the blood, the fermenting of excessive food in the stomach, and so forth. If you simply have a modest lifestyle, don't eat too much, no alcohol, no sex, that you are greatly spiritually improved, and that when enough humans get to that point, through a combination of technology and spiritual development in what is basically the eugenic sense at the time, that you will have your New Jerusalem. Disease will be absent, aging will cease to exist, and the world will go on forever in sort of a utopian ideal. People, you won't need kids because you'll be immortal. Essentially, according to Carey, and this is a legitimate biblical argument that can be made by some proponents, it was actually in antiquity. The idea that essentially a man and a woman, they should abstain from sex and get married or whatever. They shouldn't have any sexual contact. If they do, for solely the purposes of childbirth, that's okay. But it's better to be completely ascetic, basically be a hermit and go spread the good news of Christ. Now, this is roughly, therefore, an extreme zealous position for this individual. It'd be interesting to read, did he actually live his life that way and never marry or have sex or anything? That would be a more extreme eugenic position. Generally speaking, eugenics liked the idea of having more kids and wasn't geared towards immortality. It's more of the spiritualist side of it, really. But it's an interesting work. So again, some of it is now dated, as in some of the biochemistry involved isn't 100% sensible by modern standards. Like the idea that the body is basically a steam-powered machine has sort of fallen out of fashion. There's maybe some overlap. Later on, interesting, I pointed this out in the blog post about this, Dower, actually, of Theosophy, of the Theosophical movement, in Occultism for Beginners, talks about radium, the concept of the atom in a radioactive sense as overlapping with the spiritual, taking the physical and the spiritual and overlapping them in this early age of science was very, very common within these works. They didn't even have to deal with quack medicine or anything. It was simply a physical sort of thing that they talked about. Well, here's a similarity between the structure of some organ and a spiritual component within the Bible, or sometimes within Roman or Norse legend, most often Christendom at the time. And so they would say that's spiritually significant. This is, oddly enough, not an anti-traditional sort of thing to do. Kabbalah was doing it, quite some time before, actually, the mystics. Within Judaism, did this quite often. If you read some of these works, the similarity between a spiritual concept and a letter, the way it sounds or looks, the similarity between a spiritual concept and some real-world event or place or thing, or a very physical sort of thing that could happen was considered spiritually significant. Where those things seem to overlap were given extra significance, turned into entire mystic and occult systems. So again, link in the description to my edition of this work. It is very interesting, again, dated, not strictly occult in the magical sense, but extremely interesting. And if you're into homeopathy, history of medicine or science or anything like that, or the eugenic era, you're definitely going to want this. Second and third links, again, to my books blogs. That's about